My mother has a ring exactly like that.
The heavy November rain lashed against the windows of Chez Marie, a small café located in the 15th arrondissement of Paris. The establishment, with its yellowed walls and worn formica tables, was nothing extraordinary. It was exactly the kind of place Victor Montclair usually avoided. However, that evening, the 52-year-old billionaire had taken refuge in this modest café to escape the storm that had descended upon the French capital. Dressed in a 3,000 euros custom Armani suit and wearing a Patek Philippe watch worth more than most people earned in a year, he looked completely out of place in this working-class setting. Victor looked nervously at his platinum ring set with diamonds, a family heirloom that never left his side. This ring was much more than a simple piece of jewelry to him. It was the symbol of the empire he had built stone by stone since his father's death 25 years earlier. The ring bore the coat of arms of the Montclair family, a lineage of merchants who had made their fortune in the spice trade during the 18th century. Engraved in white gold, it depicted a ship sailing toward unknown lands, surrounded by delicate floral patterns that testified to the craftsmanship of the goldsmiths of that era. Victor mechanically spun it around his finger, a habit he had developed in moments of stress or deep reflection. A young woman in her 30s approached his table, an order pad in hand. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple but elegant bun. Despite her somewhat faded waitress uniform, she exuded a natural dignity that did not go unnoticed by Victor's practiced eye. "Hello, sir. What can I serve you this evening?" she asked in a soft but steady voice. Victor looked up from his mobile phone and met the young woman's gaze. Her green eyes sparkled with intelligence and kindness, contrasting with the visible fatigue on her face. "A black coffee without sugar, please," he replied politely, surprised by the natural courtesy of an employee in such a modest establishment. If you are enjoying this story so far, feel free to leave a like to encourage me to continue. And tell me in the comments, what do you think of this unexpected encounter between these two very different worlds? As the waitress prepared to head back to the counter, her gaze was caught by the brilliance of the ring Victor was wearing. She suddenly froze, eyes wide, as if she had just seen a ghost. "Excuse me, sir," she said with a trembling voice. "My mother has a ring exactly like yours." Victor frowned. Incredible! How could a simple cafe waitress possess a piece of jewelry of this value and rarity? "Pardon?" he asked, thinking he had misheard. The young woman, who now seemed very moved, repeated, "My mother owns a ring identical to yours. I recognize it perfectly. The coat of arms, the ship, the patterns, everything is exactly the same." Victor's heart began to beat faster. This ring was unique, forged specifically for his great-great-grandfather Edouard Montclair in 1847. It had been passed down from father to son for generations. And it was absolutely impossible for a copy to exist. At least that is what he had always believed. "You must be mistaken, miss," he said in a tone that was meant to be polite but firm. "This ring is a unique family heirloom. There is only one in the world." But the waitress shook her head with conviction. "No, sir, I assure you I am not mistaken. My mother has worn it every day since I was little. She always told me it was an inheritance from her grandmother and that this ring told the story of brave sailors who set off to discover new worlds." Victor felt a chill run down his spine. These words were exactly those his own father used to describe the history of their family ring. "What is your name?" he asked in a strained voice. "Camille Dubois," the young woman replied, visibly troubled by the intensity of Victor's gaze. "And your mother?" he insisted. "Marie-Claire Dubois." Well, that was her maiden name. Now she is Marie-Claire Rousseau since her remarriage. Victor took out his phone and began feverishly typing the name into his search engine. Nothing. No relevant results. Could you show me this ring?" he asked, his voice betraying an emotion he could no longer control. Camille hesitated for a moment and then nodded. "My mother lives a few streets from here. If you like, I can call her. She could come after the cafe closes around 6 p.m. Victor consulted his watch. It was already 8:30 p.m. He had planned to go home to prepare for an important meeting the next day with Japanese investors. But this chance encounter had just turned all his plans upside down. "All right," he said without hesitation. "I will wait." He took a business card from his Italian leather wallet and handed it to Camille. "Here is my contact information. I am Victor Montclair, CEO of Montclair Enterprises." Camille took the card and read it carefully. Her eyes widened when she realized who the man sitting at her table actually was. You are the Victor Montclair? The one who bought the prestige hotel chain last year?" Victor nodded with a modest smile. He was not used to being recognized by ordinary people, being rather discreet about his fortune and generally avoiding mainstream media. "I read an article about you in Le Figaro," Camille continued, impressed despite herself. "It said you were one of the most influential businessmen in France." Victor shrugged elegantly. "Journalists sometimes like to exaggerate. I am just a man who had the luck to succeed in business." But Camille was not fooled. She knew how to recognize true class when she saw it, and this man exuded a confidence and presence that did not lie. While Camille returned to her service, Victor could not help but watch her move between the tables. Despite the bustle of the café and the incessant demands of the customers, she always kept a smile and treated every person with the same kind attention. She had something special about her, a natural grace that distinguished her from all the women Victor usually associated with in his social circle. The latter were often sophisticated and cultured, but also superficial and self-interested. Camille, on the other hand, seemed authentic, real, without artifice. There was an elegant simplicity in her gestures that touched Victor in a way he could not explain. At 9:45 p.m., the last customers left the café. Camille began tidying the tables and cleaning the counter, occasionally casting nervous glances at Victor, who was still waiting, sipping his third coffee of the evening. "My mother should arrive any minute now," she told him, wiping her hands on her apron. "She was very intrigued when I spoke to her about your ring on the phone." Victor nodded, feeling his heart accelerate again. He had spent the last few hours thinking about all the possible implications of this discovery. If this woman truly possessed a ring identical to his, it would call into question everything he knew about his family history. At exactly 6 p.m., the café door opened and an elegant woman in her 60s entered. Marie-Claire Rousseau had silver gray hair, carefully styled, and wore a black wool coat of good quality, though visibly not brand new. Despite her age, she retained a delicate beauty and a natural presence that immediately recalled her daughter. Her eyes, the same deep green as Camille's, immediately settled on Victor with a curiosity mixed with apprehension. "Mom," Camille said, kissing her, "I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Montclair. Mr. Montclair, this is my mother, Marie-Claire Rousseau." Victor stood up respectfully and shook Marie-Claire's hand. "Pleased to meet you, madam. Your daughter told me that you possess a ring similar to mine." Marie-Claire squeezed Victor's hand and looked him straight in the eyes. There was a depth and melancholy in her gaze that immediately intrigued the billionaire. "Indeed," she said in a clear voice charged with emotion. "May I see yours first?" Victor held out his right hand, exposing the ring with the Montclair coat of arms. Marie-Claire leaned in to examine it more closely, and Victor saw her eyes fill with tears. "My God," she whispered. "It is exactly the same. Exactly." With a trembling hand, Marie-Claire reached into her worn leather handbag and pulled out a small red velvet box. She opened it delicately, revealing a ring identical to Victor's. Same white gold, same diamonds, same coat of arms, same ships engraved with the same floral patterns. Victor felt his legs go weak. "It's impossible," he whispered. "Absolutely impossible." Camille looked back and forth between the two rings, speechless. "They are perfectly identical," she said in a breath. "How is this possible?" Marie-Claire sat down slowly on a chair, holding the ring precious between her fingers. "This ring has belonged to my family for generations," she said in a soft but firm voice. "My grandmother told me it had been forged for her great-grandfather, Edouard Montclair, in 1847. Victor nearly fell off his chair. "Edouard Montclair," he repeated incredulously. "But he was my great-great-grandfather." How can you know that name? Marie-Claire looked at him with eyes full of sadness and secrets. Because he was mine too, Mr. Montclair. Edouard Montclair was also my great-great-grandfather. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Victor looked at Marie-Claire as if he were seeing her for the first time,
desperately searching her features for something that could confirm or deny the staggering statement.
You mean that we would be of the same family? He asked in a pale voice. Marie-Claire nodded slowly. I believe so, yes. But the story is complex, and certain family secrets have been carefully hidden for decades. She took a deep breath before continuing. My great-grandfather, Charles Montclair, was Edouard's younger brother. They had a violent argument in 1852 regarding the family inheritance and the direction of the family business. Charles left France for America, taking his share of the inheritance with him, including one of the 2 rings their father had forged. Victor listened to the story with growing fascination. But I have never heard of a brother to my great-great-grandfather, he said.
In all the family documents I have consulted, Edouard was presented as an only child.
Marie-Claire smiled sadly.
19th century bourgeois families had their secrets.
Mr. Montclair, when Charles left for America after that terrible argument, Edouard made sure to erase all traces of his existence from the family archives. He could not stand the idea that his brother had dared to stand up to him and question his authority as the eldest. She paused, her fingers delicately caressing the ring. Charles settled in Quebec, Canada, where he rebuilt his life. He changed his name to Dubois so as not to be associated with the Montclair family anymore, whom he considered to have disowned him. Dubois, Victor repeated slowly. That is your maiden name. Marie-Claire nodded. Charles Dubois, formerly Charles Montclair, was my great-grandfather.
He married a French-Canadian, Marguerite Beaulieu, and they had 3 children. The youngest, my grandfather Henry,
returned to France in 1920 after the First World War. He had met my grandmother Elizabeth in Paris during a leave.
Victor ran a hand through his hair, trying to digest all this information. So, according to you, we would be 5th cousins?
Marie-Claire did a quick calculation in her head.
Cousins, great-great-grandchildren to be precise. Our great-great-grandfathers were brothers.
Camille, who had listened to this exchange in silence, finally spoke up.
That would explain why I recognized your ring immediately, she said to Victor. Mom always told me our family had noble blood, but we never knew exactly where that nobility came from. Victor looked at Camille with new eyes. This young woman, so simple and authentic, who served coffee in a modest Parisian establishment, was actually his relative.
She carried the same blood as he did,
descended from the same lineage of merchants and adventurers who had made their fortune exploring distant seas. Do you have other proofs of this lineage?
He asked Marie-Claire.
Marie-Claire reached into her bag again and pulled out an old black and white photograph yellowed by time.
This is Charles Montclair, taken in Quebec in 1855, she said, handing the photo to Victor. The man in the photograph had features that strangely recalled Victor's own. The same square jaw, the same intense gaze, the same proud bearing.
My God, whispered Victor. He looks like my father at the same age.
He took out his phone and searched his photos for an image of his own father when young. The resemblance was striking.
And here is Charles's birth certificate established in Paris in 1825. 1825. And here is Charles's birth certificate established in Paris in 1825. In 1825,
continued Marie-Claire, pulling out a carefully folded document. It clearly states he was the son of Francois Montclair and the younger brother of Edouard Montclair, born in 1823.
Victor examined the document carefully.
The paper was authentic, the official stamps were consistent with those of the era,
and the handwriting matched the administrative standards of the 19th century.
How have you preserved all these documents? He asked, impressed. My grandmother was a very meticulous woman, Marie-Claire explained. She understood the importance of preserving family history, even if that history was painful. She passed everything to me before her death, making me promise never to forget our true origins. Camille looked back and forth between Victor and her mother, still in shock from these revelations.
So, Victor and we are from the same family?
She asked, using the billionaire's first name for the first time.
Victor nodded, a moved smile on his lips.
It would seem so, Camille. We are cousins, separated by 5 generations, but cousins nonetheless. He looked at Marie-Claire with respect.
Madame Rousseau, would you agree to come to my home tomorrow? I would like to show you the family archives I possess. Perhaps we can piece together the complete story of our families?
Marie-Claire accepted with joy. That would be wonderful. I have always dreamed of knowing the rest of
Edouard's story and understanding why the argument between the 2 brothers was so violent. As they prepared to part ways, Victor made a decision that would change the course of their lives.
Camille, he said, turning to the young woman. I would like to propose something to you. Camille looked at him with curiosity.
I am in the process of reorganizing my company, and I am looking for someone to oversee employee relations and improve working conditions in all my establishments. Would you accept this position?
Camille's eyes widened, incredulous.
But Mr. Montclair, I have no training in business management.
I am only a waitress.
Victor smiled warmly. You have something more precious than a degree, Camille. You have humanity, compassion, and the natural ability to make people feel at ease.
These are exactly the qualities I need. Marie-Claire looked at her daughter with pride and encouragement.
Accept, my dear, she said softly. It is an extraordinary opportunity, and I am sure you will do wonders. Camille thought for a few moments and then held out her hand to Victor. All right, she said with determination. I accept your proposal, but I want you to know that I am not accepting it because we are from the same family, but because I sincerely believe I can bring something to your company. Victor squeezed Camille's hand with emotion. I expected no less from you. We will start Monday morning.
I will show you all our establishments and introduce you to the teams. As they stepped out of the café into the Parisian night, Victor realized that this evening had completely overturned his vision of life. He, who thought he was alone in the world with no close family since the death of his parents, had just discovered he had a cousin and a niece. More so, he had found in Camille someone who could help him humanize his commercial empire and reconnect with the authentic values he sometimes tended to forget in the whirlwind of business. Until tomorrow, he said, shaking Marie-Claire's hand and kissing Camille on the cheeks, a gesture he hadn't done for years with someone he had just met. The next morning, Victor woke up in his sumptuous property in Neuilly-sur-Seine with a new energy. He had spent a large part of the night searching through the family archives stored in his office, looking for clues that could corroborate Marie-Claire's revelations. In an old safe hidden behind a master painting, he had discovered documents he had never bothered to examine closely.
Letters, contracts, notarized deeds dating back to the mid-19th century.
Among these papers he had found a letter written in Edouard Montclair's hand,
in which the latter expressed his anger and disappointment toward my brother Charles,
who chose to turn his back on our family and our traditions. This letter confirmed Charles's existence and gave details about the nature of their dispute. Apparently, Charles had questioned Edouard's sometimes questionable business methods, notably his relations with slave traders in the French colonies. Charles, more idealistic than his older brother, refused to profit from this trade, which he considered immoral. This philosophical divergence had created an irreparable rift between the 2 brothers,
Charles finally choosing exile rather than compromising his principles.
Victor was troubled by this discovery. His ancestor, the one he had always admired as a model visionary entrepreneur, thus had shadows in his past. At exactly 10 a.m., Marie-Claire and Camille arrived at Victor's property.
The house, an 18th-century private mansion magnificently restored,
impressed them with its discreet elegance and refinement.
Victor welcomed them personally, something he never usually did, preferring to leave that task to his butler.
Welcome to my home, he said warmly. I hope you feel at ease here. He led them into his office, a vast room with walls covered in old books and historical documents. I made some interesting discoveries last night, he said, showing them Edouard's letter. Marie-Claire read the letter carefully, her eyes lighting up as she proceeded. "This is exactly what my grandmother told me," she exclaimed. Charles was a man of principle, and he could not bear the idea of enriching himself on the back of human suffering. She took another letter from her bag, written in Charles's hand from Quebec. In this letter addressed to his wife Marguerite, Charles explains why he left France. He said verbatim, "I could no longer close my eyes to my brother's practices. Money is worth nothing if it is earned at the price of human dignity." Victor was deeply moved by these words. They resonated in him in a particular way because he had sometimes had similar scruples in his own business career. "You know," Victor said after a long silence, "I believe Charles was right. I have sometimes made decisions solely motivated by profit without concerning myself enough with their human impact." He looked at Camille with intensity. "That is why your arrival in my company is so important. You can help me follow Charles's example rather than Edouard's." Camille smiled modestly. "I will do my best, Victor, but I think you already have a more developed conscience than you believe. Otherwise, you would not have had the idea to create this position to improve the working conditions of your employees." The three new relatives spent the rest of the morning reconstructing their common family tree, combining documents and memories from each family. They discovered that Charles had had 3 children in Canada: Henry, Marie-Claire's grandfather, Marie-Françoise, and Jean-Baptiste. Henry had returned to France after the war, but his siblings had stayed in Canada and founded their own families. "That means we probably have cousins in Quebec?" Camille said with excitement. Victor made a mental note to conduct research to find these Canadian branches of the family. During the afternoon, Victor took Camille to visit the headquarters of Montclair Enterprises, an imposing Haussmann building located near the Opera. Walking through the different floors, Camille was struck by the tense atmosphere reigning in the offices. Employees seemed stressed, uncommunicative, and there was a visible lack of cohesion between the teams. "I understand now why you need someone to improve the work environment," she told Victor. "People look unhappy here." Victor nodded sadly. "I focused so much on financial results that I neglected the human aspect. It's exactly the mistake Edouard made and that Charles refused to commit." Camille immediately began taking notes on possible improvements. She suggested creating relaxation areas, organizing friendlier team meetings, establishing a merit recognition system not based solely on sales figures, and putting in place training to develop well-being at work. "These changes will require time and investment," she told Victor. "Are you ready to accept that productivity might temporarily decrease while we reorganize everything?" Victor looked at her with admiration. In just a few hours, she had identified the main problems and proposed concrete solutions. "Do what you deem necessary," he said without hesitation. "Money isn't everything. I prefer to have happy and motivated employees, even if it costs more in the short term." At the end of the day, Victor, Camille, and Marie-Claire dined together in a discreet restaurant in the 16th arrondissement. The atmosphere was relaxed and warm, far from Victor's usual business meal protocol. For the first time in years, he felt truly at home. "I have a proposal for you," he said to Marie-Claire during dessert. "I would like to hire you as a historical consultant for my company. You could help me document the complete history of our families and create archives worthy of the name." Marie-Claire, who had recently retired from her position as a schoolteacher, accepted enthusiastically. "It would be an honor," she said. "I have always been passionate about family history." 3 months later, the changes in Victor's company were spectacular. Under Camille's direction, the work atmosphere had considerably improved. She had established weekly meetings where every employee could express their concerns and suggestions. She had created a mentorship system between senior and new employees, organized social events to strengthen team cohesion, and put in place a continuous training program. Productivity, contrary to Victor's initial fears, had actually increased by 15%. Employees were more motivated and more invested in their work. Marie-Claire, for her part, had made extraordinary discoveries in the archives. She had found traces of Charles's descendants in Canada and had contacted several of them.
A true family reconstruction was underway with regular exchanges between the French and Canadian branches of the family.
"We are organizing a large family reunion in Quebec next year," she announced one evening to Victor and Camille. "All the descendants of Charles and Edouard will be invited to finally meet after more than a century and a half of separation." Victor was transformed by this new family and professional dynamic. The cold and calculating man he had been for years was progressively giving way to a more human and accessible personality. His employees began to see him differently, no longer as a distant and intimidating boss, but as someone who truly cared about their well-being. This evolution had not gone unnoticed in the Parisian business world, where people were starting to talk about the new Victor Montclair with curiosity and respect. One February morning, while Paris was covered in a light blanket of snow, Victor received an unexpected call in his office. "Mr. Montclair," said a female voice with a pronounced Quebec accent. "I am Isabelle Dubois Montclair, calling from Montreal. Marie-Claire Rousseau gave me your number. I believe we are family." Victor felt his heart race. Since Marie-Claire had undertaken her genealogical research, he had secretly hoped that other family members would come forward. "Hello, Isabelle," he said warmly.
"Marie-Claire has indeed spoken to me about you.
"You are the great-granddaughter of Henry Dubois, aren't you?" "Exactly," confirmed Isabelle. "I am also a lawyer specializing in estate law, and I have news that might interest you." Victor sat up in his chair, intrigued.
"I'm listening."
Isabelle took a deep breath before continuing. "While researching our family, I discovered that Charles Montclair had left a will in Canada. In this will, he bequeathed part of his fortune to all his descendants, including those of the French branch of the family. But there was a condition. This fortune could only be claimed if the two branches of the family officially reconciled." Victor remained silent for a moment, digesting this staggering information. "You mean that Charles had planned for a possible reconciliation between the two families?" he asked finally. "Exactly," replied Isabelle. "He hoped that his descendants and Edouard's would eventually overcome the quarrel that had divided the brothers. The will stipulates that if a descendant from each branch meets and signs a deed of reconciliation before a notary, then the inheritance can be shared equitably among all the families concerned." Victor was deeply moved by this revelation. Charles, even in death, had wanted to repair the family fracture he had so regretted. "How much does this inheritance represent?" Victor asked, more out of curiosity than greed. "With compound interest over more than 50 years, we are talking about 15 million Canadian dollars, Isabelle replied. "But that is not the most important part." Charles had also left instructions for the creation of a family foundation intended to help people in need. He wished for his fortune to serve to redeem the mistakes of the past and to promote social justice. Victor smiled upon hearing these words. Decidedly, Charles had been a remarkable man, guided by values that Victor himself was starting to rediscover. "What needs to be done to officialize this reconciliation?" asked Victor. "You should come to Canada with Marie-Claire and Camille," suggested Isabelle.
"We will organize an official ceremony in the presence of everyone we have been able to find. It will be an opportunity to sign the deed of reconciliation and discover together the spiritual heritage Charles left us."
Victor accepted immediately. "We will come as soon as possible."
"This reconciliation is closer to my heart than you can imagine."
After hanging up, Victor immediately called Camille and Marie-Claire to announce the news.
Both were as moved and excited as he was by this prospect.
2 weeks later, Victor, Camille, and Marie-Claire flew to Montreal. It was the first trip Victor had made without a commercial purpose in years, and he felt a childlike excitement at the idea of discovering the country where Charles had rebuilt his life. At the Montreal airport, they were welcomed by Isabelle, a woman in her 40s with brown hair and eyes sparkling with intelligence. "Welcome to the family," she said, warmly kissing her French cousins. "I have organized a dinner this evening with all the descendants of Charles I could contact. You are going to meet some extraordinary people." The dinner took place in a historical inn in Old Quebec. Victor was impressed by the diversity and richness of the personalities he met. There was Jean-Pierre Dubois, a philanthropic doctor who ran a free clinic for the destitute. Sophie Montclair Beaulieu, an internationally recognized painter. Marc Dubois, a university professor specializing in Canadian history. And many others. All carried within them something of Charles's idealism, each in their own way. Our ancestor would be proud to see what his descendants have become, Jean-Pierre said, raising his glass. We have all inherited these values of justice and compassion. During the meal, Victor learned fascinating things about Charles's life in Canada. Contrary to what he had imagined, Charles had not sunk into bitterness after his break with his brother. On the contrary, he had used his fortune to help French immigrants settle in Quebec, had financed the construction of schools and hospitals, and had invested in local politics to defend the rights of the weakest. He became a respected figure in Quebec society, explained Marc Dubois. There is even a street named after him in Quebec City. Victor realized that Charles had finally found a way to give meaning to his fortune, unlike Edouard, who had been content simply to accumulate it. The next day, the reconciliation ceremony took place in a solemn but warm setting at the Château Frontenac in Quebec. Isabelle had brought in a bilingual notary to officialize the deed of reconciliation between the two branches of the Montclair family. Victor and Marie-Claire, representing the French branch, signed the document alongside all the Canadian descendants present. By this act, the notary declared solemnly, "We officially declare the families of Edouard and Charles Montclair reconciled," ending a quarrel 173 years old. Applause and cheers rang out in the room, and Victor felt a deep emotion overwhelm him. After the signing, Isabelle handed Victor and Marie-Claire the keys to a safe in which Charles had deposited his last wishes. Inside, they found not only the financial documents relating to the inheritance but also a personal letter addressed to my descendants, and to those of my brother Edouard when peace has returned to our family. Victor read the letter aloud, his voice trembling with emotion. My dear children of the future, if you are reading these lines, it means the reconciliation has finally taken place. I never stopped loving my brother Edouard despite our differences. I hope you will learn from our mistakes and use the inheritance I leave you to build a more just and fraternal world. The letter continued by detailing the projects Charles had conceived for his fortune. He had imagined the creation of an international foundation that would bear the names of the two brothers, the Edouard and Charles Montclair Foundation for Social Justice. This foundation was meant to finance educational projects, aid programs for the destitute, and reconciliation initiatives in divided families and communities. Your mission, wrote Charles, will be to repair the wounds of the past and to build bridges where there were walls. Victor was deeply touched by this vision. Charles had not only forgiven his brother, but had also found a way to transform their conflict into a positive force for future generations. During the following days, the extended family visited together the places where Charles had lived in Quebec. They went to his grave in the historic Sainte-Foy Cemetery, where a simple tombstone bore the inscription, Charles Montclair, known as Dubois, 1825 to 1895. Man of good and loving father. Victor placed flowers on the grave and spoke a few words of posthumous reconciliation. Charles, on behalf of all Edouard's descendants, I ask your forgiveness for the injustice done to you. You were a man of principle, and history has proven you right. Camille, moved to tears, added, we promise to continue your work and to honor your memory. Back in France, Victor threw himself passionately into setting up the Edouard and Charles Montclair Foundation. He invested not only Charles's inheritance but also a significant portion of his own fortune. Camille was appointed executive director of the foundation, a position that perfectly matched her human qualities and social sensitivity. Marie-Claire became honorary president, charged with preserving the family's historical memory and transmitting the values of reconciliation to younger generations. The foundation started by financing local projects, renovating schools in disadvantaged neighborhoods, scholarships for young people from modest backgrounds, shelters for the homeless, and family mediation programs. But Victor's ambition was broader. He wanted the foundation to become an international model of reconciliation and social justice. "We have experienced a miraculous family reconciliation ourselves," he often said in his speeches. "We must now help other families, other communities, other nations to overcome their divisions." The impact of Victor's personal transformation was quickly felt in his company.
Montclair Enterprises became a model for working conditions and social responsibility. Victor established a profit-sharing system for all employees, created a continuous training fund, and committed to using only suppliers who respected the environment and human rights. "My great-great-grandfather Edouard built this company on sometimes questionable foundations," he explained. "It is time to refound it on nobler values," those Charles defended. The French press quickly became interested in this spectacular transformation of one of the country's most important businessmen. L'Express magazine published a long profile of Victor titled "The Metamorphosis of a Billionaire," in which he told the story of his family reconciliation and his meeting with Camille for the first time. "It all started with a simple remark from a waitress in a small Parisian café," he confided to journalists. "That encounter changed my life more deeply than all my commercial successes." The article had a considerable impact and earned Victor many invitations to testify about his experience. He agreed to participate in conferences on family reconciliation, responsible entrepreneurship, and personal transformation. His testimony particularly touched business people who, like him once, had lost themselves in the race for profit and neglected fundamental human values. "It is never too late to change," he invariably said. "We all have within us the capacity to transform ourselves and transform the world around us." A year after the reconciliation ceremony in Quebec, Victor received a surprise that overwhelmed him. Camille, with whom he worked daily and whom he had learned to know and respect deeply, announced she was pregnant. The father was David, a young doctor she had met at a charity gala organized by the foundation. "I wanted you to be the first to know," she said with emotion. "After my mother, you are the most important person in my life. You are like a big brother to me." Victor was deeply touched by these words. "And would you agree to me being the godfather of this child?" he asked timidly. Camille smiled through her tears. "I hoped for nothing less." The birth of little Charles Dubois, so named in honor of the reconciling ancestor, was the occasion for a great family celebration. All the Canadian cousins made the trip to celebrate the arrival of this new heir who embodied the rediscovered union of the two branches of the family. Victor, as godfather, delivered a moving speech in which he promised to transmit to this child the values of justice and compassion that had guided Charles Montclair. "You are the future of our family," he said to the baby sleeping in his arms. "You will grow up in a world where love has triumphed over division, where reconciliation has defeated resentment." 5 years later, the Edouard and Charles Montclair Foundation had become one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in Europe. It had financed the construction of dozens of schools, helped thousands of families in difficulty, and supported numerous reconciliation projects in conflict zones. Victor, now 58 years old, had found a perfect balance between his commercial activities and his humanitarian commitment. He had become a peaceful man, surrounded by a loving family and united by common values. The story of the Montclair's reconciliation was even adapted into a film by a renowned French director. The film, titled The Two Rings, was a great success and contributed to spreading awareness of the importance of family reconciliation and forgiveness. Victor, consulted during the scriptwriting, had insisted that the main message of the film be the idea that love and understanding can triumph over all divisions, even the oldest and deepest. During a television interview, Victor was asked about the lessons he had learned from this extraordinary experience. "I learned that we are never alone," he replied. "Even when we think we have no family left, there is always someone somewhere who shares our history and our roots. I also learned that money only has value if it serves to improve the lives of others. But above all, I discovered that it is never too late to change, to become the person we are truly called to be." On his 60th birthday, Victor held a large reception at his property in Neuilly. All the members of the extended family were represented, the Canadians, Marie-Claire, who had become like a mother to him, Camille and her small family,
and even new cousins discovered recently in Louisiana and Belgium thanks to Marie-Claire's ongoing genealogical research. Looking at all these smiling faces gathered around him, Victor thought back to that rainy November evening when he had taken refuge in a small café to escape the storm. "My dear friends, my dear family," he said, raising his glass. "6 years ago, I was a lonely man, obsessed with work and cut off from all true human emotion. Today, thanks to a waitress who had the courage to tell me about a simple ring, I'm surrounded by love and have found the true meaning of my life. This transformation reminds me that the greatest revolutions often start with the simplest gestures and the most unexpected encounters." He paused, his eyes settling on Camille, who was holding little Charles, now 5 years old, in her arms. "We have learned that the most precious heritage is not the one counted in euros or dollars, but the one passed from heart to heart, from generation to generation." The evening continued in an atmosphere of happiness and complicity. Children played in the garden, adults exchanged memories and plans for the future. And Victor felt deeply happy to have found again that family warmth he had thought lost forever. Toward midnight, as the last guests were taking their leave, Camille approached him with a mysterious smile. "I have one last surprise for you, Victor," she said, handing him an elegantly wrapped small package. Victor opened the package with curiosity and discovered a leather-bound book with the title, "The History of the Marie-Claire Dubois Family, From Division to Reconciliation." "Marie-Claire wrote it with Isabelle's help," Camille explained. "She recorded our entire history from the origins until today. This is our gift for your birthday and our testament for future generations." Victor paged through the book with emotion, discovering photos, documents, and testimonies from all the family members. The last page bore a collective dedication to Victor, to the man who knew how to open his heart and transform a chance encounter into a family miracle. "With all our affection and gratitude." That night, Victor could not fall asleep immediately. He read Marie-Claire's book. It was wonderful to see how a simple dispute between two brothers in the 19th century could have spawned such a beautiful story of reconciliation in the 21st century. He thought of Charles, the ancestor he had never known, but who had become his model and inspiration. He thought of Edouard too, and wondered if the latter would have approved of the transformation of his heir in his company. In the early morning, Victor made a decision that would mark the end of this extraordinary family adventure. He decided to bequeath the entirety of his fortune to the Edouard and Charles Marie-Claire Foundation, keeping for himself only enough to live comfortably without ostentation. "Money has never been an end in itself," he confided to his notary a few days later. "It was only a means to build something bigger than me. Now that I have found my true family and my true mission, I can leave peacefully knowing my legacy will be in good hands." The news of this exceptional donation traveled around the world and inspired many other philanthropists to follow Victor's example. The media spoke of the Marie-Claire phenomenon, this growing trend among the super-rich to bequeath their fortunes during their lifetimes for humanitarian causes. Victor, having become an emblematic figure of this new philanthropy despite himself, continued to lead by example, showing that it was possible to reconcile economic success and social commitment. Today, at the age of 65, Victor Marie-Claire continues to lead his companies with the same passion as before, but guided by radically different values. The Edouard and Charles Marie-Claire Foundation has become an international model, and his family history is taught in several universities as an example of successful reconciliation. Camille, now a mother of 3, still directs the foundation with admirable dedication, perpetuating the spirit of compassion and justice that had animated Charles Marie-Claire. Marie-Claire, aged 80 but still alert and passionate, continues her genealogical research and has discovered new branches of the family in Australia and Argentina. Little Charles, now 10 years old, already shows signs of a generous and altruistic personality that delights his godfather Victor. "He will perhaps be the next guardian of our family values," Victor often says, watching him play with his Canadian cousins during the annual family reunions. 10 years had passed since that rainy evening that had overturned Victor Marie-Claire's life. The small café Chez Marie had become a place of pilgrimage for all who knew the extraordinary story of the family reconciliation. Madame Dubois, the former owner, had retired and handed the establishment to her niece. But she had carefully kept all the testimonies and press articles that told this now legendary story. The walls of the café were now decorated with photos of the reunited Montclair Dubois family, creating a moving gallery that touched all visitors. Victor, now 75, had decided to take a semi-retirement to devote himself entirely to his family and the foundation. His hair had become completely white, but his eyes retained that spark of kindness and wisdom he had developed over the years. He spent his mornings in his office personally answering thank you letters received by the foundation and his afternoons with his adoptive grandchildren. As he considered Camille's children his own grandchildren, Grandpa Victor, as little Charles now called him, had become the beloved and respected patriarch of this extraordinary blended family. One particularly radiant spring morning, Victor received a call that would once again change his perception of family history. "Mr. Montclair," said a male voice with a slight Spanish accent. "I am Eduardo Montclair, calling from Buenos Aires. I believe we share more than just a last name." Victor sat up in his chair, intrigued. For 10 years, Marie-Claire had found many branches of the family worldwide, but Argentina was still unexplored territory. "Hello, Eduardo. How can I help you?" Victor asked with curiosity. "My family has for generations kept documents that speak of a certain Francois Montclair, father of Edouard and Charles," Eduardo explained. "But our archives also mention a third son named Antoine who reportedly left France in 1820 for Argentina." Victor felt his heart race. A third brother. This revelation was even more staggering than the discovery of Charles. "Do you have proofs of this lineage?" he asked, striving to stay calm. "Yes," replied Eduardo. "I have in my possession Antoine Montclair's birth certificate, born in 1800, as well as his passport for Argentina and numerous letters he wrote to his parents from Buenos Aires." This new discovery immediately restarted the genealogical research of Marie-Claire. Now 80 but still as passionate, Eduardo sent her all the documents in his possession via digital mail, and their authenticity left no doubt. Antoine Montclair was indeed the elder brother of Edouard and Charles, and he had left France very young to try his luck in Argentina. "How is it that we have never heard of him?" Victor asked Marie-Claire during their weekly meeting at the foundation office. "Antoine was the rebellious child of the family," Marie-Claire explained after studying the letters discovered by Eduardo. "He had revolutionary ideas for the time and dreamed of freedom and adventure. His parents, Francois and Marguerite Montclair, were conservative bourgeois who could not stand these progressive ideas. Antoine left for Argentina at the age of 20 and the family acted as if he had never existed." Victor was fascinated by this new piece of the family puzzle. "And what became of him in Argentina?" Marie-Claire smiled, flipping through the documents. "He founded an estancia, a large agricultural property in the Pampa region, and specialized in cattle breeding. But above all, he created the first free school in his region for the children of agricultural workers. He was a visionary like Charles, but in a different way." Camille, now 45 and a mother of 4, immediately proposed organizing a trip to Argentina to meet Eduardo and discover Antoine's legacy. "We cannot leave this branch of the family in oblivion," she said with determination. "If Antoine created a school, it's because he shared the same values as Charles. We must honor his memory." Victor agreed with enthusiasm. At his age, he knew that every new family discovery was a precious gift to be fully savored. The trip to Argentina was organized 3 months later. Victor, accompanied by Camille, Marie-Claire, and little Charles, now 15 and passionate about history, flew to Buenos Aires. Eduardo welcomed them at the airport with an impressive delegation of Argentine cousins, all descendants of Antoine. The family resemblance was striking. The same bearing, the same piercing eyes, the same natural elegance. "Welcome to the Argentine family," Eduardo said, kissing Victor. "We have been waiting for this meeting since my grandfather told us the story of Antoine and his brothers who stayed in France." The next day, they visited the Estancia San Antonio, the property founded by Antoine in 1825. The main house, built in Spanish colonial style, had been magnificently preserved by Antoine's descendants. In the formal parlor, a portrait of Antoine hung above the fireplace. Victor was struck by the resemblance. Antoine had the same features as his father, the same determined expression, but his eyes reflected a softness and humanity that recalled Charles. He was very loved in the region, Eduardo explained. People called him Don Antonio el Bueno, Don Antonio the Good. The visit to the school founded by Antoine was particularly moving. The establishment, expanded over the decades, now welcomed more than 1,000 students and had become one of the best public schools in the province. In the courtyard of honor, a statue of Antoine recalled his role as founder with an inscription in Spanish and French, Antoine Marie-Claire, 1800到1878. Man of vision who believed that education was the most beautiful gift one could offer children. Victor placed a wreath of flowers at the foot of the statue and spoke a few moving words. Antoine, on behalf of our entire rediscovered family, we thank you for showing the way. Your French, Canadian, and Argentine descendants continue your work. Eduardo then revealed a surprise he had kept for the end of the visit. Antoine also left a special will, he said, leading Victor and his family to the Estancia Library. Like Charles in Canada, he had planned for the possibility of a family reconciliation. From an old safe, Eduardo pulled a document written in French and Spanish dated 1875, Antoine bequeathed half of his fortune to his direct descendants and the other half to all the descendants of his brothers, Edouard and Charles, on the condition that they one day reunite to honor his memory and pursue his educational work. Antoine's fortune, accumulated over more than a century and a half, represented a considerable sum. But as with Charles's inheritance, the money was not the main thing. Antoine had attached a heart-wrenching letter to his will. My dear brothers Edouard and Charles, if our descendants read these lines, it is because family love has triumphed over our quarrels of old. I never stopped loving you despite the ocean that separated us. I hope our children will know how to do better than we did and that they will unite their forces to build a better world. Victor wept as he read these words. The three Marie-Claire brothers, separated by pride and misunderstandings, had all three kept the hope of a posthumous reconciliation. This discovery gave birth to an ambitious new project, the creation of the Marie-Claire Educational Network, which would link Antoine's school in Argentina, the schools financed by the foundation in France and Canada, and new establishments to be created in other countries. We are going to realize Antoine's dream, Camille declared during a press conference organized in Buenos Aires. Education will be our way of honoring the memory of the three brothers and transmitting their values to future generations. The project was welcomed with enthusiasm by the French, Canadian, and Argentine governments, which committed to supporting this international educational initiative. The stay in Argentina was extended by 2 additional weeks to allow Victor to get to know all his new cousins. He discovered a large and united family, proud of its French origins but perfectly integrated into Argentine culture. Some of Antoine's descendants had become important personalities: an ambassador, a famous tango dancer, a recognized writer, several doctors and teachers. All carried within them something of their ancestors' idealism. Antoine would be proud to see what his descendants had become, Victor said during the grand farewell dinner organized at the Estancia. Back in France, Victor threw himself with renewed energy into organizing the first world meeting of the Marie-Claire family. The event was planned for the following year at the Palace of Fontainebleau, and was meant to gather all the descendants of the three brothers discovered throughout the world. Invitations were sent to families in France, Canada, Argentina, and also to those discovered recently in Louisiana, Belgium, Australia, and even Japan, where a descendant of Antoine had emigrated in the early 20th century. The preparation for this historical event mobilized all energies. Camille coordinated logistical aspects. Marie-Claire worked on the genealogical exhibition that would trace the family's complete history. And Victor personally took care of welcoming each family and financing the travels of those who did not have the means to make the trip. This meeting must exclude no one, he insisted. Rich or poor, famous or anonymous, we are all equal before our family heritage. D-Day finally arrived. More than 300 descendants of the Montclair brothers gathered in the gardens of the Palace of Bells, Fontainebleau on a magnificent September day. Victor, despite his great age, was radiant with happiness seeing this human sea that represented the culmination of 15 years of research and reconciliation. Children ran among the adults. Languages mixed: French, English, Spanish, and even a few words of Japanese. But the emotion was universal. The opening ceremony took place in the courtyard of honor of the palace. Victor, surrounded by Camille, Marie-Claire, Isabelle, from Canada, and Eduardo, from Argentina, delivered a speech that would remain engraved in the family memory. My dear cousins from around the world, we are gathered here today to celebrate our differences, but also what unites us. We are the heirs of 3 extraordinary men who had the courage to leave their native land to follow their convictions. Edouard, Charles, and Antoine have bequeathed us more than money. They have transmitted to us values of courage, justice, and generosity that make us a family united across borders and generations. The genealogical exhibition prepared by Marie-Claire was an extraordinary success. On giant panels, the history of each family branch was traced with photos, documents, and testimonies. Visitors discovered with wonder the richness and diversity of their common heritage. Some learned of the existence of cousins they would never have imagined having. Others found missing pieces of their family history. "It's magic," said a great-granddaughter of Charles who came from Vancouver. "I understand now where certain character traits in my family come from." The highlight of the meeting was the signing of a Montclair family charter by all the descendants present. This document, drafted collectively over the previous months, committed all branches of the family to perpetuate the values of education, social justice, and reconciliation that had animated the 3 founding brothers. "We, descendants of Edouard, Charles, and Antoine Montclair, proclaim the charter. Solemnly engage ourselves to transmit to our children and grandchildren the love of family, respect for differences, and the conviction that education is the key to a better world." The meeting concluded with a grand ball in the palace salons. 3 orchestras, French, Canadian, and Argentine, took turns making the whole family dance to the rhythms of their respective countries. Victor, despite his age, opened the ball by inviting Camille to dance a waltz to the tune of Lie and Rose. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear. "Without you, none of this would have been possible. You have been our family's guardian angel." Camille, moved to tears, replied, "It is you who made everything possible by opening your heart. You taught us that love can move mountains." 2 years later, Victor Montclair passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his entire adoptive family. He was 84 years old and could leave serene. His legacy was in good hands. The funeral was grand, with representatives from all branches of the family coming from around the world to pay a final tribute. The funeral procession symbolically passed in front of the small café Chez Marie, where it all began, and a minute of silence was observed before the establishment that had changed the course of family history. Victor was buried in the family vault at Père Lachaise alongside his parents. His grave bears a simple but moving inscription: Victor Montclair, 1965 to 2045. Businessman turned man of heart who proved it is never too late to find one's family and values. But his true monument is the foundation that bears his name and those of his ancestors, which continues to work worldwide for education and social justice. Camille, spiritual heir to Victor, took the lead of the Montclair Empire with the same humanist philosophy as her mentor. Under her direction, the company continued to prosper while maintaining its social and environmental commitments. Little Charles, having become a young man of 25, already worked alongside his mother to prepare the next generation of family leaders. "Grandpa Victor is watching us," he often said. "We must be worthy of his legacy." Marie-Claire, despite being over 90 years old, continued her genealogical research with the help of her computer-passionate grandchildren. She had published several books on the history of the Montclair family, which became references in French genealogy. "As long as a breath of life remains in me," she said, "I will continue to look for our lost cousins in the world. Our family is like a giant puzzle with pieces still missing. Today, 15 years after that first chance encounter in a Parisian café, the history of the Marie-Claire family continues to be written. The Marie-Claire Educational Network now counts 27 schools in 12 countries. The Edouard and Charles Marie-Claire Foundation has helped more than 100,000 families in difficulty. And the World Family Reunion has become a biennial event gathering more than 1,000 descendants across all continents. The extraordinary story of Victor and his family proves that the most beautiful miracles often arise from the simplest encounters. A waitress who recognizes a ring. A few words exchanged in a modest cafe, and a family saga unfolds that exceeds everything one could imagine. This story reminds us that we are never truly alone. That somewhere in the world, people share our history and our roots. And that sometimes a careful look and an open heart are all it takes to discover the hidden treasures of our existence. The small café Chez Marie still exists on Rue de Vauzirard. A golden plaque at the entrance now tells the full story of the Marie-Claire reconciliation. Every day, hundreds of people stop there, drawn by this modern legend that proves love and family can triumph over everything. And sometimes in the hubbub of the café, one still hears the echo of those magic words that changed everything. "Hello, sir. My mother has a ring like yours." That concludes this extraordinary family saga. If this story moved and inspired you, don't forget to leave a like to celebrate the power of family love and reconciliation. And tell me in the comments, does this story make you want to research your own family roots? Do you believe, like Victor, that it is never too late to change and find what truly matters in life?